Welcome back. Our second panel explores Gulf states and mediation, pathways to strategic cooperation. Moderating the session is Dr. Yasmin Farouk. Dr. Yasmin joined the Crisis Group in March 2025 as Gulf and Arabian Peninsula Project Director. She leads the organization's research, analysis, policy, and advocacy on Gulf countries and oversees its work on Yemen. With over 20 years of experience in research and policy on the Gulf region and Egypt, she previously served as a senior advisor at the European Institute of Peace, visiting scholar at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, and non-resident scholar at Rice University Baker Institute. She also advised Egypt's Prime Minister's office and led research at the Cairo International Center for Conflict Resolution, Peacekeeping, and Peacebuilding. Our panelists are Dr. Khalid Lekhlaifi, Her Excellency Dr. Manal Radwan, Dr. Badr Saif, and Dr. Ilham Fakhro. I invite you, you're already on the stage. You may now start. Thank you.
Good morning, and thank you very much. It is still morning. Thank you very much for coming to this panel, and thank you so much for your patience. It gives me a really great pleasure to moderate this panel because it's a panel of friends and colleagues for whom I have a great respect and appreciation, but also because I know they don't agree. They don't agree on today's, or first of all, the framing, I am sure, but also they do not, their countries at least, don't share the same approach to mediation, even if the four countries here represented and the Gulf countries are becoming increasingly under the spotlight for their mediation efforts. And when I say mediation, I say it while being very cognizant that sometimes it is not just public mediation, sometimes it's back channeling, sometimes it's hosting. There are many formats and many practices, I would say as many as the Gulf countries. But it's also very intriguing to see that it is always framed as new. And I know that some of the panelists will think that Gulf countries' mediation practices are actually not new. Some aspects of it might be new. Maybe the global scope of it, maybe the high stakes of it. But for those of us who know the Gulf countries and follow the Gulf countries over at least since the independence of Gulf countries, would know that some way, shape, or form of mediation among themselves and in conflicts outside of the Gulf have always been present. But part of the discussion is actually to understand why this spotlight on Gulf mediation today, and I'd be more specific on GCC mediation today. And the other part of it is to explore whether some form of coordination, cooperation exists, is desired, are the practices complementary, what are the conflicts that come to mind or are the priorities. I have already interacted with my colleagues here, and I believe that we will see from their presentation that they also don't approach mediation the same way. A country like Qatar sees mediation as part of its identity. It is not simply a foreign policy tool. I think we will hear from Her Excellency Manal Radwan how Saudi Arabia approaches mediation, peace efforts, and conflict resolution, if I may say. Kuwait is a country that has also a long tradition, and Bahrain as well. So without further ado, I'll kick off this discussion with, I think we have almost 45 minutes for the Q&A, and then we will open it to the audience for direct interaction with the panelists. I would like to first start with Her Excellency Manal Radwan. I'm sure everybody here knows her, but she is a minister plenipotentiary at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, and she is advisor to the minister. I'll be very blunt in this moderation, and I would like to first start by asking you, does the size of the country, the weight of the country, make a difference in the approach to mediation? And I'm asking you this because we have seen the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia not newly coming into the mediation realm, but actually hosting and offering mediation and good offices in very high stake conflicts, and sometimes in conflicts where other countries as well are involved. What is your approach to mediation or good offices or facilitation? What is its place in Saudi Arabia's foreign policy today?
Thank you, Yasmin, and sorry for coming late, but the Doha Forum is so successful that there is no way to possibly be covering all sessions or even doing the diligent due duty to be on time as a speaker in any of the sessions so far. So I apologize for that. Of course, thank you very much for bringing us here. I would maybe take a bit of a different perspective from what you have offered in the introduction. I'm not sure that the Gulf countries don't agree on mediation. I think we view it as a complementary approach. I think that each country has its own style. I don't think that this is also something that is specific to GCC countries. For example, in Europe, that has always been known also for its mediation efforts. Different countries do different things. The way the Swiss do it is different from the French, different from the British. And I don't think that this is a reflection of disagreement or different positioning, but maybe a complementary approach that hopefully is beneficial to the resolution or transformation of conflicts. Saudi Arabia is not a newcomer. Thank you for acknowledging that. We've been doing this, I think, since the inception of the state. You've also said since the independence of GCC countries. I just want to also highlight that Saudi Arabia has always been an independent state. And so maybe that also gives it a certain impact on how it sees itself and sees its relationship vis-a-vis the other Gulf countries, the Arab world, and the international partners at large. We have been in our mediation efforts historically, we have been instrumental, for example, in ensuring African countries gain their independence, ensuring that they have a seat at the United Nations. There's a long history also in mediating conflicts inside Africa. Since the 60s onwards, of course, we have also played an important role in mediation, in facilitation vis-a-vis the Arab-Israeli conflict, which we view as a priority and has always been a priority since King Abdulaziz onward. We maybe, I think, the lack of understanding of where we come from, first, that mediation now has become a buzzword. And so people view it as like a modern exercise of diplomacy, but it is at the heart of diplomacy anyway. And so that is one issue. Second, I think we have not done a good job in documenting our efforts. And I think this is not a problem or a challenge for Saudi Arabia only, but also for the other Gulf countries. And I think that is something that we are now thinking of amending, both in Saudi Arabia, but also at the GCC level. Third, maybe this is very particular to Saudi Arabia, and maybe this alludes to your reference to size and weight of the country. Saudi Arabia does not do mediation or facilitation or an active foreign policy to gain prominence or to gain headlines. And I think that is something maybe true also of some of the Gulf countries. A lot of mediation, I don't see a Omani representative here, but a lot of the mediations that also took place in Oman has been not something that was in the front lines of media and covered heavily. And they actually like it that way. They are maybe even a little bit reluctant when they are mentioned. So it varies amongst GCC countries, but the most important thing that is essential for us as an assessment, whether we would approach a conflict as facilitator or mediators, or we lend our good offices, are few factors. One, we need to ensure some kind of a success. Of course, you cannot 100% know what the result of the mediations or the facilitation or the role that you are playing. But we need to ensure some kind of success, which means that the conflict or the conflict parties are ready to engage. So not mediation for mediation's sake, so that's one. Second, that the objective that we are pursuing are ones that are consistent with accountability, with the peace, with justice, with sustainability. So we are very much reluctant to address conflicts that are very much piecemeal, if you want to say, or limited in objective, or even objectives that could lend themselves to be successful in the short term, but also counterproductive in the long term. So for us, that this is extremely important. The third factor, I think it's also a new language in the area of mediation and conflict, which is transformation. We don't view our efforts as something that would be subject to the conditions as they are. But we try even more recently, we've been doing that even more so, to unpack, certain aspects that seem to be frozen, and to open up for possibilities that address the long-term objective, but also make space for redefining what are the interests of the conflict parties, and even touch on issues that are as deep as identity. That's why we like the word transformation more than resolution, for example. We think resolution is a big tool that it also plays a lot of we need to manage expectations, basically, is what I'm trying to say, and open up for creative possibilities.
Thank you very much. I'm sure, I mean, at least I have so many questions, and I hope that some of those questions will be in the Q&A. But you mentioned buzzwords, and it is very true that when it comes to mediation, it has become a buzzword. It becomes even buzzer if you use GCC mediation, and then it becomes even more attractive if you add competition to it. And this is why I'm going to, this is my segue to you, Dr. Khalid. I have, well, first of all, I mean, I'm sure many of the people here know you, but Dr. Khalid Al Khalifi is a diplomat and academic specializing in international relations. He has written and spoken about small state studies and state power dynamics. Thank you for being here with us today. My question to you, and the title of this panel, is about whether there is room for cooperation between the Gulf countries in mediation. And I think the reason also, to be realistic, there is more emphasis on mediation is because there are conflicts, and the conflicts are rising not only in our region but beyond our region, and because some of these conflicts like Russia, Ukraine have polarized the world, and there is now a space for non-traditional mediators, I would say, or non-Western mediators, if you want, to play a role. So my question to you, because your country has also a long history in mediation in the region and beyond, is do you see space for cooperation, coordination between the Gulf countries as the need for mediation rises and as the conflicts become harder to resolve and more high profile?
Very interesting question, to be honest. I think I have an issue with the terminologies of trying to scope mediation with just the Gulf. Not against the mediation form, but to be quite precise, I think we're all calling for peace. And as you said, if you look at the statistics when it relates to the numbers increasing of conflicts around the world, not just conflicts, it's the different dynamics of how do you understand the conflict nowadays. The way that you perceive non-state actors nowadays is tremendous. One of the most questions that we, surprisingly, we still getting asked is, you're talking to Hamas, right? We get it. you want peace, how could you achieve it? And hence why I believe that there is an issue if we want to limit our cooperation to mediation to a certain parties. Mediation isn't a concept that merely a regional effort, but a global effort. And hence why we saw 2 days ago a perfect example of minilateral mediation between Qatar, Norway, Spain, Switzerland. And everyone was like, we get the others, Qatar is involved. What Qatar is offering might, what I will agree with you here is, might be new form of tactics when it comes to the toolkit of mediation. Um, what I've understood in the process design of mediation is that there's a huge distinction between how a state performs mediation. And our process design mediation is simply requests, which is the pre-stage of our involvement, and then analyzing the conflict, whether Qatar could achieve, and that's a very important question. You cannot obligate countries to mediate. If they're not willing to mediate and they want to take other roles within the conflict, that's very much well respected. And hence why I think that it shouldn't be framed as the GCC cooperation, because the GCC is not the European Union. Like we don't have an EU representative on every single conflict. Like I just met the EU representative on the Africa, right? And they're quite focused on Somalia, for example. And then you meet another EU representative on the Horn of Africa, apparently. And then you meet another EU representative on the Great Lakes, and then you meet another EU representative. I get it, but our mission here is to actually affecting the process of the mediation and achieving a successful mediation. And hence why I think, and alhamdulillah, we've been able to achieve quite a lot lately. A couple of months ago, we had the DRC, and a while before it, we had the DRC and Rwanda. And our track record is going well. But you know, as you said, I think whatever there is an area of cooperation, and by the way, that is an example of, as Her Excellency was saying a while ago, there is a lot of discreted mediation that occurred behind closed doors for specific reasons, because we all have the same intention to actually achieving peace within those conflicts. And peace sometimes requires discretion. I know as much as the media would hate to listen to that, sometimes we do our best. Sometimes they do their best to fetch certain attempts, I would say. But you know, again, it depends on the mediation toolkit that exists within every single country. Oman has an excellent example of where we cooperated on Iran. Qatar was involved lately, or requested to be involved on a late stage, but we also did our best. What we can do from Qatari toolkit mixed with Omani toolkit, we've done excellent example in Syria with Saudi Arabia. And there are many more. There are many more. So I think it shouldn't be categorized as the Gulf as a whole, but on a case by case. What can Qatar and Saudi do on a certain stage? What could Bahrain and Kuwait do on a certain stage? What could Oman and Saudi, for example, do on a certain stage?
Thank you very much, Dr. Khaled. But also, among the potential, let's say, criteria to at least classify or approach the different mediation attempts is that in some conflicts, as you mentioned, for example, Iran, or when it comes to Gaza, and particularly when it came to Qatar, increasingly it is coming with a risk. It is coming with a reputational risk. In your case, it has come with a security risk, a double security risk, I would even say. But also other forms of risk and security concerns that come with mediations are increasing in a sense, I mean, to the point where it has become a subject, not only, you know, whether to mediate or not because of the elements that Her Excellency highlighted, whether it is useful, whether it is needed, whether it is asked for, whether it will transform the conflict. But now mediators have to think, am I going to be attacked? Am I going to pay price, an extra price, in addition to the reputational cost? But also, mediators come with a reputation. They come with an image that sometimes put them also at risk. And I'll use this to move the discussion to Dr. Ilham Fakhru, who is a former ICG, I have to say, because we're very proud. But she's currently a research fellow at the Middle East Initiative at Harvard Kennedy School in the US. Although, of course, there is a merit to think about Gulf mediation or GCC mediation beyond the Gulf. But I wanted to ask you about the GCC mediations, the specificity, if you agree with me, about GCC countries. They are now surrounded by conflicts, and they are mediating in those conflicts, knowing that they have very high stakes in those conflicts, with direct reflections on their security, their stability, their international relations, their relationship with the US, with Russia, the stability of the energy markets. So my question to you is that how are they, or how can they manage those security threats, reputational risks, accusations of bias, political and economic costs, when they are trying to do something good, which is to mediate instead of becoming party to a conflict?
Thank you, Yasmin, and thank you to the Doha Forum for having us here today. So I think, first of all, I will address the question on security threats and risks for Gulf mediators. I think, of course, the most significant and recent risk that we saw was Israel's strike on Doha, which, of course, violates all principles of international law and the norms of regional diplomacy. But more than that, I think it's the first time that we see a party that's participating in a negotiation process launch an attack on the negotiator itself. And that's what makes it especially kind of unique and egregious, in my opinion. The Gulf response to this, I think, offers us some important lessons on how to deal with such security threats in the future. Following the attack, all of the GCC states issued statements of unity with Qatar. Many Gulf leaders, several came to Doha, in fact, to show their solidarity with the process and reaffirm their support. And this kind of unity is very important because it shows that the mediation process has a regional backing. It raises the cost of targeting the mediator, and it strengthens deterrence in this way. So going forward, this kind of unity should be showcased, I think, early on at the beginning of the process as a type of deterrence. The second point as well with reference to Qatar is the use of third-party guarantees. External guarantees from the US and from European states can also be very important in securing the security of the process and of the mediating state. So 2 weeks after the attack on Qatar, the White House issued a statement stating that the United States shall regard any armed attack on the territory, sovereignty, or critical infrastructure of Qatar as a threat to the peace and security of the United States. So these kind of assurances from third parties are also extremely important, and ideally you would have both the regional and the international element of this. I think as well to kind of manage risks, we should think about maybe trying to unify mediation practices in some kind of way. And this doesn't mean that it has to necessarily be done jointly, but greater cohesion and coordination is also something that can help these processes. And with this, I looked at examples, globally. When have states with different foreign policies and different positions come together to launch coordinated mediation? And I found examples in Latin America from the Contadora Group. In 1983, 4 regional states in Latin America, Mexico, Venezuela, Colombia, and Panama, faced a similar situation as to what the Gulf states face now, which is a myriad of conflicts and civil wars in their immediate neighborhood. And despite having different foreign policies, they came together to begin to coordinate some kind of mediation effort. And I think the way that they did this is very interesting and can maybe tell us something. Um, the first stage in 1983 was simply informal coordination. The foreign ministers from these countries began meeting in Panama and agreeing on very basic principles for mediation that they could all agree to, including preventing regional war and promoting dialogue. The year after that, they began to issue collective statements on one another's mediation and express that kind of solidarity for one another. By 1985, they began bringing in, expanding the coalition to bring in a support group made up of bigger states, Argentina, Brazil, and Peru, as a support group to bolster the mediation of these smaller states. And finally, they combined mediation with economic tools and incentives. And I think there's some, despite the different context, lessons that we could maybe learn from. First of all, if there were to be any coordination in the GCC, this doesn't have to take place institutionally from the beginning. It could just be informal coordination between foreign ministers or officials, and having these channels open. Second of all, it would mean commitment to broad principles. For example, non-interference, things like that. Creation of collective security guarantees would be an important one as well, and developing a kind of structure where, these smaller states do have support from bigger states, like Egypt, for example. And of course, linking economic tools to peace processes. So I think that's what I had for this.
Thank you very much, Ilham. And thinking about ways in which countries could work together, and actually your comparison with Latin America is very good in showing that it is not specific to the Gulf, right? As Dr. Khalid said, it could be partnering with countries that are outside the Gulf, but it's also sometimes when it comes to regional problems, if you want to revive the mantra of, regional solutions to regional problems, it might sometimes be more effective, efficient to have regional coordination, but sometimes it doesn't work, right? And sometimes you need to pull out, to pull on resources from bigger countries, from third-party guarantees, as you said. Badr, I would like to move to you, and it's great to have you last because you're always telling us things outside of the box, and I love how refreshing your perspective is. And also, you come from a country that, at least for us from the region, we know Kuwait has a very long tradition of mediation. It was personalistic in style, but God, it was effective and it solved problems in many cases. You need no introduction, but of course, for you who don't know, Badr is professor at Kuwait University. He's also a fellow at Chatham House. He's a former colleague at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, and I'm very proud of that. Better, it is clear that, again, if we focus on the 6 GCC countries, each one of them can bring something different to a mediation table in a very impressive way. I mean, the simplistic way to see it would be their global outreach, their financial wealth, their credibility to some countries, their non-Western heritage. But really, each one of them has something different to bring at some times. Are there existing structures that we can use, or are there formats or mechanisms that you can think of, like something within the OIC or a group of friends or something that exists already that you think is very promising?
Rahman Rahim. Thank you, Yasmin. It's a pleasure being with a group of friends and colleagues. I'm very happy to be in such a distinguished panel and happy to be back at the Doha Forum. Thanks for the invitation. And thank you for flagging Kuwait. I didn't have Kuwait in mind because, like my colleagues, I think the way we see ourselves is as global citizens. I think the Gulf brand has been out there for some time, and it has been indispensable to solving problems beyond the Gulf location. But since you've mentioned Kuwait, let me say that we get badgered a lot about entering this mediation scope because money are not students of history, unfortunately, and they don't understand that our presence as Gulf states in mediation really even predate the independence of the countries. For the cases of the Gulf states other than Saudi Arabia, of course. And I can think of many, many examples stretching whether in Kuwait in the late 19th century, between disputing factions in the region, whether it's in even the early 60s when Kuwait played a role in mediating between Saudi Arabia and Egypt on the Yemen conflict. I can go on, Bangladesh, Pakistan, Turkey, Bulgaria. There is a long record there, and that has come in handy when there were some intra-Gulf issues as well, including the latest that we had a few years ago. But let me tell you, we are now in a space in which there has been more recognition of our role. And I think by playing a very indispensable role in the two most cited conflicts today, Gaza and Ukraine, the different Gulf states have things to offer. And I think that's where we come in a very unique fashion. It's more of a divide and conquer space, even if they don't will it as such. And you have different formats. You flagged maybe the OIC and the GCC prior to that, or a group of friends. And if one asks, which format should we pursue to get the best outcome? And I say, following the playbook that the Gulf has been successful in is being agile, flexible, pragmatic, nimble, and yes to all of the above. The GCC obviously is an intergovernmental organization, as you know. It needs the consensus of the six states to move with something more formal. And there could be an appetite for that. And let me just flag for you an example of the summit that happened last week. One example is the GCC came together and agreed to put in a GCC Civil Aviation Authority. And this follows in the footsteps of many other such organizations. So this could be a space in which they can follow through. Probably with the OIC, I would be less ambitious. It's a larger organization, the second largest multilateral after the UN. You're talking about 57 member states, big representation, 2 billion peoples, 8% of the global GDP. But I think it suffers from what multilateral organizations usually suffer from, which is the large corporation syndrome in which bureaucracies tend to be in place. So I think going with also the group of friends in which different countries come together on different tasks and you get to choose between them. But to me, Yasmin, I think it's not so much the format of who does it, but how is it done? And that's, I think, where the value add of the Gulf and in recent practices is we've engaged in different types of mediations. We've engaged in facilitative mediation, for example, where you see, most of the Gulf states, I mean, Oman comes to mind, but the others have played that behind the scene role, facilitating, offering an enabling environment, being a host, passing messages. There is a second type that we've been involved in as well, which in the literature of mediation, they'll call it evaluative mediation, in which there is a bigger role to be played by the mediator, by proposing ideas, by pushing through certain agendas. And the third type of mediation that we can say is also present in the Gulf space is what we can call directive mediation, in which there is a much bigger role in which the disputants go back to the mediator to get some cues on them. And what I'd like to propose, and it's in the footsteps of what Dr. Manal has raised, is we need to move to transformative mediation. I think that's where we need to build up towards this, whether bilaterally through any single individual Gulf state or collectively as 6 Gulf states. And what does that entail? Having a mediation ecosystem that we can thrive on. I think, first of all, building it on the principles that we've used to lead our through the region, being flexible, agile. There is no lecturing involved as it comes with other historically traditional mediators. Second, you would have to come in with a clear design. Now, each mediation is unique, but I think there is a sense in which we can develop a TOR, terms of reference, on what kind of tools we can pitch in and use as if it's a drop-down menu. A third thing that I would add to this list is the question of putting in success metrics. How do we measure impact? And I think we haven't done enough of a job in pushing that to pursue it for the next round of mediations, whether with the same disputants or other ones. In terms of identity, who are the mediators? Are they really government entities? Or are governments and states pushing for a bottom up approach? Are we bringing in outside forces that can help in certain cases? I'm thinking probably religious leaders at one point, tribal leaders, civil society, and certainly within our own institutions. Could ports authorities be a mediating force where it is more present in certain ports? And on this note, I think the role of agency is also important. We have to empower the disputants. We need to give them the space to flourish. And I would propose having an insider mediator role. So even within the Gulf, we need to think out of the box on how we can empower voices from within the disputant spaces in which they can then carry on the mantle, because transformative mediation is all about going towards the root causes, trying to not go back to the same issue, and to put a platform to move forward to other issues which we care about. You know, peace and prosperity is hard earned, it's not a given. And I think working consistently on it is the thing that the Gulf states have been trying to push further.
Thank you, Bedran. And let me start the second round of questions with you, actually, by pulling out something from what you said. And also, um, I mean, as I said, the word competition between Gulf countries makes any conversation more attractive and sexy to follow. But let me ask you the question about if we look at Russia, Ukraine, for example, you see that different Gulf countries are all mediating in the same area, the humanitarian area, right? And then one country moved to actually the political space, which is the UAE, by hosting, as we said last week. Um, do you see, again, as an academic, having more freedom to talk, do you see that there is competition, even if it is competition for the good cause, that there is this competition in mediation between the Gulf countries? And how do you see its impact in Iran or in Gaza or in Russia, Ukraine? Is there competition, and is it good or is it bad?
Look, on this issue, I think, is it competition or is it competitiveness? Is it having a competitive landscape in which we thrive and we try to excel each in his own space? There is a lot of coordination that takes place, but that doesn't get reported on. And I know our colleagues in the government maybe can tell us more about these. And that's where there is a divide and conquer mentality. Let's try to use the best offices of each country to support our cause. On the specific Russia-Ukraine case, I mean, I'll also flag the Saudi hosting as well of the US and Russia talks, which was very crucial. And look, when this happened and we were pushed to take a position and the Gulf states decided not to, very clearly, although they were against the invasion, obviously, but not to take escalative measures against Russia, it's because you need to think of the end game, that there needs to be a resolution. And in the last year and a half, I would say there has been some kind of vindication to that approach, in which there was a full circle and people are now coming back to the Gulf to pursue certain elements, and also to the larger region. Turkey plays a role, certainly, in this file, where we can take those elements that come from the different member states is to push for an institutionalization drive. I think there is a lacuna in Gulf mediation studies. There is a lacuna in studying our own practices. How have we done it? Who has done it? What is our institutional memory? How can we have training and capacity building? How can we then generate a brand to the Gulf that can be then used in other places? I think that's where we can move our collective countries together.
I mean, amen, Badr, and I would encourage that officials give us more of their time to be able to conduct this research, because I think it is missing, exactly as you said. But Your Excellency, Manar Radwan, I would like to ask you also here. Of course, Badr mentioned that you were the first to host Russia and the US, but also a delegation from Ukraine. And I have to say also that this did not begin with President Trump. The kingdom has been offering its good offices instead of becoming a party to this conflict or to many other conflicts. But it seems to me that whether on Gaza, or on Russia, Ukraine, or in Sudan, there is the humanitarian side where the kingdom is playing a very important role. And honestly, sometimes I feel that not documenting it actually helps it go on, but it doesn't mean that it's not existing. And for people in the field, they know it exists. But it seems to me that the kingdom's mediation, or at least let's frame it that the kingdom finds its added value in the political realm, rather than using, humanitarian mediation or economic mediation or other. Does that seem like an accurate assessment to you, that when you tackle a conflict, you tackle it from the political side since the beginning?
I think I would take just a note that I don't think it's competition, and please forgive me, Badr. I don't think it's also competitiveness. The Gulf states don't need to compete against one another. I think the role is very well known globally, and they don't need that. And I don't know why we don't say, as I mentioned before, the Europeans are competing on their mediation efforts. We don't say that. I take really an issue with that. So that needs to be corrected, at least from my point of view and the point of view of the kingdom. We value the efforts that Qatar is doing. We value the Emiratis, we value the Kuwaitis, we value the Omanis, the Bahrainis. We welcome that. We also help and facilitate, and there's a high level of coordination that takes place, and sometimes it's not very visible to others. That doesn't mean that we are all on the same page every time. I think that's not reasonable. And I think that is even not healthy. We are not one state, we are 6 states. Most of the time, we have we agree on the core, and sometimes the way in which we want to help or play a role in resolving or transforming conflicts might be taking different routes, and that's okay. Again, it's the complementarity approach, and not either competitiveness or competition. I feel it's belittling to the GCC to highlight it in that way. Having said that, now to your question on do we value political or do we value humanitarian? Well, I will take the Ukraine example. I think people have forgotten that early on in the Ukraine conflict, Saudi Arabia, also Qatar, and also the UAE played a very important role in some of the prisoner exchanges that happened and the release of children. And there was no competition there. We all believed in the humanitarian value of this, and we believe that that we could actually help and succeed in that, and we all pursued it, and it was very successful. On the political efforts, I think what is accurate is also going back to my earlier comment. We view our role most beneficial in using our leverage in addressing the grassroots to the conflicts rather than just a cosmetic or a short relief. So it's not humanitarian versus political. We would be very happy to offer our good offices in anything that would facilitate, of course, in the humanitarian cause. But also, and also very important for us is to be of value in addressing the political situation, especially when we think that we could facilitate and we could play a positive role, and we are viewed as value added, not to be sucked into the conflict. And so I think that that is important for us.
Badr would like to.
Thanks for taking me on, because it may have not come clearly why I distinguished between competition and competitiveness, to your point, by the way. Because the way I saw competition when it was framed is when countries go against one another, but competitiveness is trying to get the best out of yourself to then present it to the other offices. So I think we're saying the same thing.
I think it's complementarity. I think
Yeah,
that's a more.
yeah, yeah.
Absolutely. And Dr. Khaled, one of the things that Badr mentioned, and that is linked to those buzzwords of GCC, mediation, competition, is pragmatism and nimbleness, and that Gulf countries don't lecture conflict parties when they come in, that they don't have the colonial heritage when they come into a conflict, and hence they are more accepted. But one of the things that are ignored is that they do have another baggage. I mean, those countries do not come from nowhere. They do have a history and a baggage that is sometimes positive, sometimes negative. But I wanted to ask you precisely about this normative side. And I know this is not part of the issues that we discussed, but it is something that is important to put on the table. Because even when Gulf countries are being presented as more pragmatic, and the word transactional comes out a lot, it is sometimes presented in a negative way. So I wanted to ask you about the normative framework when Qatar decides to mediate. What are your principles as a mediator when you're doing this, as you said, between Colombia and the Gaetanista, but also doing it in a conflict like Palestine, where Qatar has a position as a country, but then again, as a mediator, needs to be practical, pragmatic, and sometimes transactional to get humanitarian aid in? What are your principles for mediation?
If not Qatar, then who, I think, is the question. Qatar was requested by those countries to be involved as a mediator. If you're asking me why could we go to Colombia, for example, simply a shuttle diplomacy, we could do it. We could speak to the parties. We could bring the parties to Doha, facilitate the talks. But to go back on to the principle of why do we do it, it's the sole principle of why every single institution in the international organization was established. It's the sole principle of why the international law was established. The first pages of the United Nations Charter essentially was established for peace and security. And this is why I think nowadays, as I said at the beginning, is that we view conflicts differently. The dynamic of the conflicts is no longer the same. Approaching the conflicts are no longer the same, and it allows you to adapt to your mediation toolkit. And yes, sometimes the historical background of the mediator is important and is the way that it is perceived by the conflicting parties, but sometimes it's not. The case scenario of Afghanistan will contradict the essence of the case scenario of Colombia. If you're saying that the reason why Qatar was able to mediate with Taliban is because they're a Muslim country, well, what about Colombia then? I think it's how do you adapt to the conflict? How do you understand it? How do you analyze it? How do you allow yourself to be involved not as a force of power to the conflicts or pointing the finger to the conflicts, doing this or else. It's more of trying to understand both conflicting parties. What do they want? What are they trying to achieve? And how do you address it? How do you address it with regional actors? For example, the DRC and Rwanda mediation, the African Union already had mechanisms applied. We only attempted to emphasize our role to bring the African Union's mechanism into application. So if you heard the statements given by the Minister of State, it was very clearly that all the 9 protocols that came out of the DRC and the M23 group, for example, will be applied by the African Union. So it's also helping other regional organizations. The OAC in Colombia is another example. Uh, you know, and hence why I think it's the matter of principle is that if you're not mediating, if you're not resolving conflicts, I think what kind of world do we want to live in is the question. And for Qatar as a small state, we don't want more conflicts within the region. And that's why we're more of a peace advocates.
Ilham, let me ask you the same question, but also add on it. So my also the same question would be, what is Gulfi about mediation? Like when we say GCC mediation, what is especially the normative framework that comes to mind, but also in a very pragmatic way, what is the added value that individual countries, if you want, or as a whole, if you want, bring to the table? Why are more and more actors coming to the Gulf countries? Yes, there is the fact that conflicts are becoming more difficult to solve, that traditional mediators have started taking sides in conflicts, that the Gulf countries have stakes and interests, but what else? And I don't necessarily mean, the simplistic way of saying, yeah, it is Gulf culture about sulh and reconciliation, because yeah, maybe that's part of it. But what is it that is distinctive about the mediation by Gulf countries?
Yeah, so there are a few things around this. I think, first of all, in many conflicts, the Gulf states have been very careful to adopt positions of neutrality or non-involvement. And I think of Russia and Ukraine as a good example. So early on in this conflict, there was quite a bit of pressure on Gulf states to take a side in this, not to allow, Russian money to be invested, for example, in the UAE, not to allow Russians to buy property, things like that. And there was a clear pushback on this. And interestingly, this is something that at first the Western states criticized, but then seeing that it would be beneficial, it allowed these same states to play a role in mediation. So I think, first of all, it's this resistance towards taking a side in certain conflicts that allows them to play the role of mediators. In other times, it's their role as a regional power that sometimes may have more credibility than an outside power in resolving disputes around the region. I think of, for example, the restoration of diplomatic ties between Saudi Arabia and Iran. Initially, the groundwork for this was laid by Oman and others, and they're the ones who had credibility towards restoring this. Also, partly because of their good ties with all. So it really comes to this maintaining of good ties with various parties, plus the regional element of being part of the region and the history of the region and having that credibility that adds to it. I think now to add a third criteria to it is also experience. There have been so many success stories coming out of the region, mostly out of bilateral mediation. I think the Saudi-Iran example is such a good one, because a few years ago that was thought to be completely out of reach, but it happened in a process led by Oman and Iraq at first, and then later China's involvement. But it was a regionally led effort. And when we see success after success, including the release of with Ukraine, the release of hostages and things like that. Gaza or Afghanistan as a great example for Qatar. That has really given these countries credibility when you see one example after another. So now I think to add to these points, they do have a very solid track record, which makes them very suitable mediators. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Ilham. I'd like to open the floor to questions from the audience. Can someone maybe bring a microphone?
Hello, my name's Sayed Moaz Shah from the Geneva Graduate Institute. I'm also a member of the MENA Mediation Hub, which is more of a, not a state level, but at least the principles are the same. Thank you so much, Badr, for sharing those thoughts on history. And when Dr. Khalid made that comment about talking to parties that maybe you don't want to talk to, Pierre spoke this morning about there will always come a time when you will have to speak to that party. It reminded me of Umar ibn Abdulaziz when he spoke to the Khawarij, and it caused 3 years of peace before there was conflict, but no one was willing to speak to them. So in this context, Yasmin, you asked this question, and it's a question that was wondering in my mind, what does GCC bring that's something unique? And I think there is something, and perhaps the panelists can share their thoughts on the concept of majlis and the importance of majlis and how that is used in that context. And more controversially, if I can, in the modern era, but it is an effective tool that has worked in the GCC historically, is intermarriages. And how that institution itself, what are lessons from that that sustain the peace in this region? And last but not least, Excellency Manal, if you can shed light a little bit, I think Saudi Arabia is so special. They have an institution as the custodian of Al Haramain that has been used historically in the shade of the Kaaba to sign peace deals and negotiate it between non-state actors. How Saudi Arabia can leverage that tool in this time, especially knowing that a lot of conflicts around the world are particularly in the Islamic world. Adding a shade of sanctity to peace deals, is that effective? Do you think that would be a good strategy? Thank you.
Would any of the panelists like to address those questions?
I tend to agree with you. Saudi Arabia is very special, obviously. And yes, thank you. I know that. I think that we have a special role to play, and we have very important and a unique leverage. And I think, again, when we think that that is a value added, then that's how we approach it, whether it is actually in the context of OIC, if it's helpful, or in the context of discrete talks between parties, or even in the sanctity of Al-Kaaba, as has been done before. But we are also at the same time very vigilant about it and very cognizant that we don't lend ourselves to be used as a platform that is not beneficial and that actually not conducive to transforming conflicts or the resolution of conflicts. So it comes with what I'm saying is that it comes with a sense of responsibility, and we take that responsibility very, very seriously. I want to say something. You said Gulfi mediations. I don't know why. I mean, you say European mediations. I will tell you something. Mediations and conflict resolution in general is a very Eurocentric field, whether in the academy or whether in practice. But we don't say European mediation. We just say mediation, but what we mean is European mediation. And if anything that deviates from that or offers another lens, then it becomes Gulfi, or I don't know, I haven't, maybe African mediation or tribal. Or, you know, I don't know. I mean, to tell you the truth, looking at Europe now and looking at the United States, I think they compete in this tribal thinking more than we are striving to actually base our mediations and good offices on the nation state concept. So, and I think that brings us to a very important point, which is, again, the lack of documentation, the lack of lessons learned, the lack of offering also our long history. And when I mean history, I don't even mean modern history, but you know, the long span of history in the Arab and Islamic civilization. We have to do more because we have to inform this very Eurocentric field, and we have a lot to offer, even in the gender lens of things. That I thank you very much, Yasmin, for bringing an equally gendered panel. Well, I am not counting Yasmin, of course, as a moderator, but just the panel. But even in that, we have something to offer. And I think that is our responsibility to bring to the table, so that people don't come to us and say Gulfi or not Gulfi, or even sometimes I hear the petrodollar mediation, because people, when they look at the GCC, I know you're shy to say this, but I will say it. When people see a GCC country, they look at dollar signs, you know, in their eyes. Even though that the wealthiest nations in the world are not just the GCC countries, you know. So I mean, we have to unpack these things because they are extremely important. And I will even delve into more critical or sensitive issue. There is a sense that anything that has the GCC involved in it has to deal with conflict or with competition or with something bad is about to happen. So when we do good offices or when we do mediation, then it becomes inconsistent with the dominant narrative that is very racist in the most part. And so then they have to find another excuse as to why we're doing this. You know, it's because we want to exert our influence, or we want to use our money, or we want to side with one party against the other. There has to be something bad about it. There has to be something malign about it for us to be part of it. I think we have moved beyond that lately. And I think that we were able to counter that narrative, but the racism is still there. And the discriminant view of GCC policy and GCC good offices is still there. And also, if they see that you are involved in a conflict, then there are no shortages of people around the world that would come to us to teach us about a conflict that sometimes actually is in our neighborhood, and to teach us about what best that we should do and what we should avoid. And and if you don't actually follow their advice, then you're just incompetent. Not that you can, God forbid, know better or have a more complex understanding of what works and what doesn't.
Thank you for that refreshing perspective. I would also add this about, for example, I do remember when there was a big fuss about development aid, right? And so many books and articles were published about the newcomers to development aid. When I think Kuwait and Saudi Arabia have been doing this, especially when it comes to sub-Saharan Africa, since the 1950s, and even before that, since the 1930s. So there is some truth to this, but just for the sake of the debate, it is true that we have seen a period, and this is for any of the panelists, the period of the Qatar blockade. We have seen, I think this is what ingrained in the imaginary, this idea of when the Gulf countries act elsewhere, it is out of competition, because part of it was asking other countries to side with one side or the other. My question would be, is this page turned not in the sense of that Gulf countries should not compete, all countries compete with each other, and as you do the comparison with Europe, France and Germany and Italy and the UK, they all compete for roles, including in mediation, because mediation is also influence. It's a way to act on a conflict, and the outcome is never far from who helped produce it. And there are many examples to corroborate this. But I heard you a lot today talking about complementarity, that maybe many Gulf countries are intervening in the same conflict, but not to compete, but to complement each other. And to make this session a little bit more concrete, I'm going to ask you about this in a file that you all know well, which is, for example, the Iran file today. There has been all those, articles and calls on Gulf countries to play a more prominent role in mediating between Iran and the US. But this is also a conflict where Gulf countries see themselves as having a direct interest. It has a direct implication on them, and in which they don't all necessarily agree on the way to go. So, Dr. Khalid, this question is for you. Do you see Gulf countries today more aligned in their good offices between the US and Iran? Are the differences when it comes to enrichment, to regional activities, to Iran's status in the region, hampering the good cause of reaching a deal? Or actually, no, today we are in a new page where they are complementing each other, they are working on what's common in that file?
Well, I think when it comes to the issue of Iran and the United States, is that there are so many layers that you need to cover. So I'll do my best just to you know attempt to address a couple. One of the things is that all the Gulf member states share the same concern when it comes to the nuclear program, especially the one in Abu Shahar, which is a tremendous issue, especially what would happen between the so-called claim to be 12 days war. And how would that affect on water security, maritime security, energy security? It has so many dynamics in the way that it could be affected. So that's one thing that I know you want to hear more of Gulf cooperation, so I'm just giving you an example of that. Another thing is that after the agreement in 2015, Qatar already attempted to be involved at that time in 2015. The case was raised again with the attempt of Oman, and hence why I think that question should have been to Dr. Yusuf Bruji if he was here. And our attempt was to help wherever the talks are in deadlocks. That was our recent attempt in the talks. Will there be more in the future? I think they're interested for talks. Will it happen? I think we already have enough in our plates. So let's focus on the current situation. I think if you may me, I'll just add one more point in relation to uh, recording the efforts of mediation. I think we've done a very good example. There is a gallery here. I don't know if some of you have visited that showcases the historical efforts of Qatar and its mediation. Another good example is that CHS have done a very good data collection on Qatar's effort, the recent book that has been published on Qatar's mediation. And I think this is a very good example of the way that how can you make your think tanks much more effective in making sure to gather the database on the efforts of mediation. It's very essential and it's very important. And I echo what Dr. Manal was said on this very particular.
Are there any questions? Yeah. Could you please?
Thank you all very much. Very quick question. Question of capacity, because I think a lot of the times we're just going to see more and more conflict. And I just really wonder, how can we address some of these issues, and how can we give mediation the best kind of effort as we can? Because there seems to be a capacity issue in general, and there's more demand on us. And also, that question, or the spirit of capacity, what roles do think tanks play in mediation and facilitating mediation as well? So I'm wondering if you all could speak to that issue as well. Thank you very much.
If I may, I'm going to take all the remaining questions and then give the floor to the speakers. Excuse me, the gentleman. Yeah.
Thank you very much. My name's Dan Smith, and following on your point about think tanks, I was director of the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute for a number of years, and before that, Peace Research Institute in Oslo. And the reason for my question is something that Her Excellency said early on when you were describing criteria for thinking about Saudi participation in mediation exercise. You said that without a guarantee, you nonetheless wanted conditions which did the most possible to ensure success. When I started in this field, one of the pieces of advice, I mean almost reassurance that I received in Oslo, was that don't be afraid to fail. In fact, I was told 99 times out of 100, it's not going to work. And I was also given the piece of advice as a think tank leader that, and this came from the Deputy Foreign Minister, your failures are your own. But I assure you that we will not blame you. And the one time that you do succeed, I will turn up and be at the press conference. So I just wanted, I mean, I understand the importance of ensuring success, but I also wanted to ask you how that balances with willingness not to succeed.
Okay. There was a question in the front row, please. Here, the gentleman. Thanks. Oh, gosh. Yes, and then the lady.
Thank you very much, Madam Moderator, and really deep appreciation for the insights, both the specificities and the collective approach to mediation. More of a comment, because I think what is distinct for many of us now, and I'll speak personally, is the consistency of commitment we see from specific countries within the Gulf to maintain an investment in not only peace diplomacy, but the undergirding fundamentals that enable peace diplomacy to really be a sustained engagement, namely in the upholding of international law. And I think currently, the consistency of these two things is what is remarkably distinct, because we see an inconsistent investment in peace diplomacy, even in traditional quote unquote places where there has been that political investment, as well as an inconsistent advocacy and application for the fundamentals that would make for a more sustained peace engagement. I would further say that I appreciate this pushback on distinction, whether it be a Gulf approach to mediation or, as we've heard, perhaps in the last 15 years, an African approach to mediation. By comparison to what? This is the question. I would also, though, encourage there is particularity. There is culture. There is practice that is brought to the table, and fundamentally there is relationships that are forged through various ways. For me, the core shift at present is on venue, trusted venue or venues, because of the ways in which other venues have been perceived or have become politicized and no longer conducive for convening parties to a conflict in a way that they feel sufficiently welcomed. And this is opening up new channels and spaces for Doha, for Muscat, for Riyadh, for a number of places in a consistent way, by comparison. Thank you again.
Thank you very much for those very insightful remarks. I'm sad they come in the last 5 minutes. You should have raised your hands. I think they are very important. Please.
Thank you very much. Very much building on what the colleague just said. I'm Sara Pantuliano from ODI Global. And again, it's more of a comment. I found the conversation really refreshing, insightful. I think we would need to do this a lot more all around the world and not just in Doha, and bringing this exchange more globally. I represented Italy in the Sudan comprehensive peace agreement, in the process, the IGAD process that led to the Sudan comprehensive peace agreement. There were 4 observer countries. 2 were EU at the time, the UK and Italy. Then we had Norway and the US. And of course, we were working with the IGAD countries. We certainly didn't have a unified position. We certainly didn't have, a like-minded position to start with between the 2 EU countries that were amongst the observer and with the rest of the EU. And from the beginning, there were countries that went in and they were seen as much more sympathetic to the government of Sudan, and others that were seen as more sympathetic to the SPLA and wanted separation from the start. And in a way that, siding that, some of you have spoken about is also part of the process of bringing the parties to the table, because inevitably they will trust one of the mediators that they see a bit more aligned. And so what you need to do is to continue to iterate and exchange as observer countries, as mediators, to make sure that you progressively converge towards a process that the parties feel comfortable with and trust. And everything I've heard here confirms that that is exactly what also the GCC countries bring to the table. The expectation of a Gulfi approach is so paternalistic, is so out of place, and I think you are right to speak out against it. I think it's always a pleasure to hear Minister Manal. I think what we need, as you said, is a lot more of that scholarship that brings the distinctiveness of and the history of the Gulf mediation and the approach, so that you can complement what in the West we've been talking about and writing about for a long time. So yeah, I just hope that we can bring this conversation a lot more globally.
And last, there's a question here.
Thank you. This is a very good discussion here, highlighting the GCC countries' efforts in terms of mediation and peace accomplishments so far. GCC countries, each country has its own uh, huge strategic participation in that field, especially in the last 3 decades. When we speak about Saudi Arabia, when we speak about Kuwait, when we speak also about Qatar recently, and we have this, we have noted how this approach have been very successful, especially in both the Arab world and the Islamic world so far. Today, we have witnessed that GCC countries have participated in a larger scale discussions regarding and peace mediations all over across the world. We have Saudi mediating between Moscow and between Russia and Ukraine. We have now Qatar investing in terms of many talks in Africa as well. Uh, the question is here: how GCC countries collectively can ensure having the right strong power and soft power to convince and persuade these countries that go beyond their region and geopolitics of coming to the table and ensuring the sustainability of continuing what they agreed on. That's my
Thank you very much. We really have to, like, we have 5 minutes or even less. Can we go just over for 5 minutes? 5 point. Okay, I would like to start in reverse order with Ilham, but just to go back, I did not mean Gulfi in a negative way, and the fact that it was taken this way actually vindicates your point. And there is nothing wrong with having a normative framework, because when Western countries intervene, they say, the West is always synonymous with human rights and democracy. And so we need to unpack, as you said. So I'll give each speaker 2 minutes to respond to the questions that they feel most comfortable to respond to.
Sure. Thank you for all your questions. I think just as a general remark, something that we haven't really talked about is kind of tying the Gulf states mediation to this increasingly multipolar world. And I think increasingly in the last few years, alongside the rise of mediation by the Gulf states, and certainly I appreciate the comments of the panelists that this is not something new. It dates back quite a long time. This growing mediation, I think, also reflects the Gulf states carving out their own path in this landscape. Whereas previously, some years ago, I think there was much more willingness and alignment to go along with the United States and what it wanted and what it was doing in the region. I think now increasingly there's a bit more thoughtfulness around, okay, there may not be some compatibility in certain issues. There may be more of a desire to be neutral. There may be more of an interest of, for example, having relations with Iran, which is in the regional interest at a time when the US was not on board with that. So I think we are seeing the Gulf states carve out their own niche in a competitive and multipolar world. And this mediation is also, we can, I think, understand it as them doing what they need to do to thrive in that context.
Badr?
Peace building requires a lot of hard work, and I think we have our work cut up for us. There needs to be more investment in this approach and more innovation. And I think where we need to go next is to think of how to work on preventive diplomacy. How can we prevent issues from coming up? I think that would even increase what Aziz was saying on capacity building, because there will be more innovation. Think of it as a brand. Think of it as a franchise. I think where we can go from this part of the world is to try to develop a model, and then, and I'm speaking in a business term, but then sell the model, right? Market the model, present it as something that goes beyond the region to try to address conflicts in a different manner. And I think if we think along those lines, it also fits in with how we see the world, because we're certainly moving into, there are competing world orders today. Multipolarity is certainly on the rise, but it's not set for granted. And the way the Gulf has been operating is that It looks through an apolar mindset in which it's dissolving these poles and it's trying to find, as Ilham has said, a niche for itself. So I think that's where we need to keep the ball rolling. We need to communicate that. I think what we have an issue with actually is more transparency. Given how busy and loaded the agendas are, there hasn't been much time to sit back and reflect and be transparent about how we're going about things. And I think we need to spend more time doing that. We need to celebrate the successes. We need to discuss the challenges and take it to the next level.
Thank you. Ms. Radwan.
I think that just to answer some of the comments also from my co-panelists, I think for Saudi Arabia, we have always known where the space of agreement with the US or with Europe lies, and we have cooperated very successfully. And when we disagreed, we were very vocal about it since the inception of the relationship and since the number one conflict that was addressed in the meeting between King Abdulaziz and President Roosevelt was on the Palestinian issue and was a point of contention, not a point of agreement. So I don't, and when we agreed, for example, in the era of anti-communism, because that was in the interest of Saudi Arabia, we very much cooperated and collaborated. And in the era of the war on terror, we had disagreements, we had agreements, and we also navigated that. And we continue on and on in terms of certain conflicts or even the region at large and how we view the region at large. So we always had that niche, I think, and we were never shy to pinpoint disagreements when there were. And there were many reasons. I mean, there were many incidents that would attest to that. So just to highlight that. On capacity, yes, we need our youth to be more involved. And I think we are paying more attention to that. But on think tanks, if the think tanks come to tell us how to do things and to lecture us and to pretend that they know about about either conflict or mediation or our region more than we do, and they are not ready to listen and exchange in a respectful manner, then we say thank you very much, we can do without. But in a very respectful and a way in which we actually engage with these think tanks, because mostly are Western think tanks, then I think it's very welcome, and we have also good examples of that happening. On this cultural, Gulfi, Arab, Muslim, whatever, I'm not saying that, I'm actually saying that we have something to offer and we have something that we need to enrich, not academic circles and practitioners. I am saying as opposed to what? Why are we not saying Western or European or American mediation? I think that is what, I mean, we don't need to have the European model as the yardstick in which we compare everything to it. This was my comment. On the failure part, I mean, I think this is what distinguishes Norway from, for example, Saudi Arabia's mediation. I didn't, and I said, there's no absolutely ensuring that you would be successful. There are, of course, risks that you take as a mediator, sometimes even security risks. But I'm saying that for Saudi Arabia, the prospect of adding value to our role, and the prospect of, which means that we have something to offer that would lead to the success of the mediation efforts, is one of the very important criteria that we try to assess. If the Norwegians see it another way, I mean, great, excellent. That's why we need Oslo in many of these conflicts, and we appreciate what Norway does worldwide. And we have a very constructive and a very deep and important relationship with Norway, especially now in the context of Palestine and the Global Alliance. And that is also another example of complementarity, not just in the region, but beyond.
You have 2 minutes.
I'll do my best. and I'll give you the cheat code of how to deal with think tanks when it comes to mediation is that if you don't want to listen to them, just ask them to send the reports. And this is what we do sometimes is that, we ask them to bring, like, for example, you can expect a certain diplomat to be an expert on Afghanistan, DRC, Rwanda, Colombia, name it, Venezuela, and else. So hence sometimes I think the way that we utilize in our mediation style think tanks is that sometimes we initiate track two diplomacy, which kind of helps, through the think tanks to have meetings with experts from the country itself, which kind of, develops the way of the mediator's understanding to the historical root of the conflict, which kind of sometimes even helps me if I sit down with certain conflicting parties to understand the reason why they think like that, and kind of paves the way for mediators. Hope that answered the think tank's question. But I just want to say one thing is that Qatar knew the consequences of being a mediator. We're still on it. We got hit, yes, we get it. The issue isn't with the mediator, the issue is with everyone who created the international system since 1945. This is why I was saying is that unfortunately we're still dealing with an international law that was established since 1945. And when you're asking for new additional protocols, you're going through an international global bureaucracy that doesn't allow you to even change the international laws chapters to the current status quo of the international system. And I think our academics here would agree that that shift of global system allows a change within the global order, allows countries to adapt to what's happening. And I don't want to be the bearer of some news that others wouldn't like, but Hong Kong just initiated International Mediation Organization. Where are we going with this? Is this shift happening already?
Let's talk about
I mean, this
panel
is
about
no, and then this is very true. And with all due respect, if Stockholm fails in a mediation, the Guardian wouldn't write the same report if we fail in a mediation. And hence we understand that. We understand that the media is going to do whatever the media is going to do. And we're going to do whatever we can do to bring peace to conflicts because we believe in peace at first hand, understanding the consequences that's going to come at us, directed at us, and we're surviving.
Thank you very much to the four of you. I hope this is the beginning of the contribution, not only to the literature, but to the system itself of how mediation is done. Thanks a lot for staying with us and have a great continuation.